Hi, everyone. Welcome to the We Shape podcast.
Hey, girl.
How's it going?
It's going good.
Yeah? Are you doing okay?
I'm doing good.
How many weeks pregnant are you now?
We'll be 34 weeks pregnant tomorrow.
Ooh.
Every time I hear you say you're doing good, I'm like, really? Really?
I mean, that's another podcast, I feel like, to talk
It
about
is
all those
another
things.
podcast, but-
yes, but I'm surviving. It's happening. We're doing it.
One day at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm excited about our guest today.
Me too.
Her name's Colleen Christensen. We're going to have a really good, she's a registered dietitian. We're going to talk a lot about food freedom. I love the concept around food freedom. And we have a lot of people around on food on the podcast because it's a really complicated topic. And I love to bring in as many perspectives as possible. And a lot of times when people join We Shape for the workouts, they're like, well, what am I doing about diet? And I'm like, oh God, that's a really loaded question. And I'm not giving you any diet. Go listen to the podcast. So, but before we get started, last episode, I was talking about the Rest deck by, I feel terrible. I thought her name was Teresa Hershey. Her name is Trisha. I'm so sorry.
We're sorry, Trisha.
Her Instagram is the Nap Ministry. You can find her on Instagram. She's incredible. She has a great book called Rest is Resistance. And she just came out with a deck that you so kindly got me for my birthday. Like, you know me so well. I'm like, what's this? I'm like, oh, it's the Nap Ministry Rest deck. And so I'm really excited. I hide these all over our office. And I want to read one of them.
Yeah, let's do
Okay,
it.
well, I'm just going to pull a random one. Let's
ready.
see what the universe wants to have us today. Okay, to rest in a capitalist world takes practice and meticulous care. You don't need anyone's permission to rest. You don't need anyone's permission to resist. You don't need anyone's permission to disrupt. Offer yourself grace as you craft and experiment with your rest practice. Take your time. There is no need to rush. Liberation is a lifetime process.
Should we just
Well, that's
cancel
it for the
podcast?
podcast today. See you
Damn,
guys all
she's
later. I'm gonna lay in
good.
bed now.
We'll go take a nap.
Highly recommend this deck. It just little thoughts for the day. I'm a big fan of decks. So the Nap Ministry, Trisha Hershey, thank you so much. Let's get started with our guest
Yes.
today. I'm going to pass
I'm
over
so
the
excited
computer.
because-
This is going to be a good one.
This person is someone I follow on my own personal Instagram, and I love the way she brings a ton of energy and fun and excitement around these topics, which are really challenging topics. So anyway, today we have with us Colleen Christensen. She's a registered dietitian and a non-judgy educator, here to free you from diet culture once and for all. Through her proven no food rules approach to intuitive eating and nutrition, she has helped thousands all over the world break up with dieting, find balance with their eating, and make peace with their bodies. Gosh, if that isn't the goal. Colleen, we're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat. I have to say, it is kind of kismet that you guys just mentioned the Nap Ministry, because I was on a walk before this, and so I'm listening to the book Burnout. I'm 99% positive they just referenced that in the book. So I was like, oh my goodness, this is how in sync we
meant to
are,
be.
you guys. This is going to be like such a good combo, I can tell.
We're vibing.
Yay.
We're vibing. Yes, she has phenomenal content and just brings such amazing perspective. But my favorite thing about her is her ability to give permission to kind of take back your own life and not subscribe to all of the toxic messages that sometimes come through our culture.
Which follows so greatly into what we're going to talk about today, right? Which is all these food rules that we all subscribe to,
the
and
rules.
how they're made up by other people. They don't necessarily come into trusting with ourselves. Oh my gosh, I'm excited.
Yeah.
It's going to be good.
Well, let's start, Colleen. Why don't you tell us how you got into your line of work? Give us a little journey of how you got to where you are today.
Yes. So it's funny because what you see today, I mean, I am on Instagram doing these skits talking about having no food rules. I never once imagined this being my career, social media, let alone educating people on how to not have food rules. So essentially, the work that I do today has all come out of my own struggles. I have struggled with a variety of eating disorders, disordered eating for so long, and it took me a long time to overcome that. And even as I had worked through that, I always thought that doing this work, helping others with disordered eating, would hit too close to home. And I was like, I just think I don't want it to trigger me or anything. But the more normal food became for me, I was like, I have to step in and be the person that I didn't have, because I could have sidestepped so much. I mean, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and I could have found this place of food freedom and just peace with food so much faster and way less, you know, all over the place if I would have had someone to give me a little bit of education, help me be the guide that I needed. So that's kind of how I got in this line of work. I have a previous career. I worked in a very small clinic dealing with inborn errors in metabolism, very, very rare genetic disorders. So I always say it's kind of funny. I have such an understanding of quite literally how each nutrient is metabolized, how the body actually functions. And I still preach for food freedom, like in intuitive eating and not having food rules, because that truly is the best way to nourish our body. So yeah, never saw this as being my line of work, but it is just so fulfilling to be able to teach this stuff because it's so good when you can get to this place where food is easy. And you warmed my heart when you said she just brings kind of like humor and just kind of a lightheartedness, because that's my goal with the content that I create. Is I want it to be both fun but also educational and engaging, and for people to feel seen and sometimes say that feel stuff that we feel potentially shameful about, but we don't need to feel shameful about, because we have been taught this stuff and so many of us struggle with it. I guess, long story short, I try to make kind of a taboo topic less taboo so we can all kind of move through it and get to this place that is just so good.
Well, you're nailing it.
I mean, this might be a great time.
A
A great time for you to ask about. Remember, you wanted to talk.
Well, one of my favorite skits that you did in the not so, kind of recently, I guess, was like the almond mom stuff. Like, I just think the almond mom stuff is
Tell
so
me what
amazing.
it is.
What
I
is
need
the
to know.
almond mom
I would probably
stuff?
have to lean on Colleen for that, but like almond moms are something I think that was kind of born via TikTok. I'm assuming. I'm not a huge TikTok user, and it's like she just does a great job of being on trend and on topic, and again educational and very fun and making accessible information. Like,
What's an almond mom?
All right,
Colleen's
let's
like an
call it
almond mom.
You're right. I think
I'm
it
afraid
did,
I might be one, so I'm scared to ask.
it did kind of spur on TikTok. So essentially, I think it spurred from, oh my gosh, what is her name? Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Hadid. What is her first name? Yolanda Hadid. So she has like
gosh.
2
The
model
Hadid's
daughters.
mom, yeah.
And so I think it started
Yolanda,
with her
that's right.
where she
Oh, yes.
had told her, daughter some diety advice. She says it got misconstrued, whatever. Moral of the story, it went viral. And this idea of an almond mom, essentially like counting our almonds and, being very just diety. And I think when we were able to put a name to it, it was kind of like, it's less of this abstract idea of a mom, having this diety thoughts. And I mean, honestly, and I never like to blame quote unquote almond moms,
Right.
because they are also a victim of our society and culture. But I think when you
Totally.
can put a name to where a lot of your learning of diet culture came from, it just was a more concrete thing for people to realize, oh, like I did actually learn this from somewhere. This isn't my fault.
Right.
And it just went viral, and just kind of saying the things that we all heard when we were growing up, just like counting the almonds, or you shouldn't have this, or, we have to earn the food, all of those things. And it's just, I feel like it makes you feel so many things, because on one hand, you're like, you feel this like gut punch of like, oh my gosh, like, yes, I resonate with that. But then also there's like, you can see it for what it is now. So it's a little comical. I just feel like it elicits so many emotions.
It does. And I know for me, like when you talk about food rules, I think people don't even always really know what food rules they subscribe to. And when I hear almond mom, I think about like a time in my life when I was attending, we always like don't use the names of the brand stuff, but like Schmate Schmotchers. And they were like, if you're hungry.
Nicely done, by the way.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
That was a good one, right? they talked about like, if you're hungry, have a handful of almonds. And like that is a food rule that I don't
Drink
even
a glass of water.
I didn't even really think I like was still kind of walking around with, but like, just have a little handful of nuts, but not too many nuts. Like, and the food rules always have two sides, right? It's do this, but also don't do it that way. Like eat
Oh my God,
eat
there's
this,
so
but
much
don't eat
pressure.
too much of it.
I
And
thought
that's
an almond
crazy.
mom was going to be like the crunchy granola mom.
No, granola moms. That's a different thing.
Yeah, yeah.
There's all
Okay.
kinds of moms.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say, Colleen, was something that you said in the very beginning that I just found so beautiful and something that I think a lot of people need to hear, which is, a lot of people struggle to find like worth and meaning and purpose in what they do in their lives. And you had a very simple journey. It was, I have a personal issue that I'm trying to solve, and you solved that problem and you shared it with the world. And I think if more people focused on, hey, what are the things in my life that I'm struggling with, that I feel compelled to go figure out and really master, and then how do I share that information with other people so they don't have to hit all these different failures and struggles and these different avenues, and can have a more clear, concise journey towards this end result, there'd be a lot more people in this world who would feel a lot more fulfilled and feel like they have a real purpose. So I just want to commend you in saying that and taking that journey. It's so important, I think, to learn, grow, and share. We were just talking about rules, though. I'm so curious, since you're the one who teaches this, what are the rules that you most often see people subscribe to that you're like, whoa, we got to tackle this one?
There's so many. I mean, carbs have been demonized. Like, I feel like everyone is terrified of carbohydrates. That's definitely kind of a broad one. But I really think that the sneakiest food rule is the food morality rule. A lot of people will tell me, I don't have food rules, Colleen. I will eat something, or I'm just being quote unquote healthy. And the food morality rule is saying I shouldn't eat this, or it's bad. It's not, food rules aren't just what we do and do not allow ourselves to eat. It's truly our mindset about that food. If we think that food, is bad, we shouldn't have it. That morality is a food rule in itself. So I think that's like one of the sneakiest ones. And then just the determination of what we can and cannot eat. And it's funny because you had mentioned earlier in this talk of how just arbitrary these food rules are. And I think in terms of like times that we can eat or quantities of things that we can eat, a lot of times what I'll hear people tell me is, I don't even know where this came from. I just started following it. Like I can't eat breakfast before XYZ time. And we try to think back to like, where did that come from? I have no idea. Sometimes, yes, there can be like a specific point, but it's just bananas how everyone's rules are always totally different too. And I think that just speaks to like, they're made up. Like, people can have totally opposite rules. And
they're constantly changing too.
Half a banana is always one. It's okay to eat a full banana.
Oh my. So here's where we've talked about this with registered dietitians on the podcast before, but I love to just get so many different perspectives on this, because I'm finally at a place in my life where I can go, okay, yeah, the half a banana, the counting the almond, like, okay, it's just wild that we thought that was emotionally healthy for us, or physically for that matter. But this idea, so here's where I get stuck, and I just want to like have complete honesty here,
Yeah.
even if judgment might come my way. I get stuck with like chemicals in foods because I don't want to say it's bad, but I'm also like,
It's bad.
I'm just
Food rules really loud
I'm
for
also
you.
like, I'm a believer that, like, I'll give you an example. So like when I travel outside of the US, whatever I eat, I tend to just feel better in my body, like just the physical reaction to the food. And I feel like in the US, we don't really value food quality. And I think that the food system has sort of combined with our capitalistic culture, and so it's like it's more of a profit driven center versus like, okay, like how are we growing the food, how are we caring for the food, how do we value the food. And so I get stuck in the morality part. I don't want to have judgment, but I want to have a new perspective on how I look at all the chemicals that they put in food.
Yes. Ooh, and no
stuck.
judgment by any way, shape, or form. I love these conversations. And I think that one thing that I feel like draws people to me specifically is my focus on the idea of gentle nutrition. I care about, yes, food freedom, but I also care about the way that you fuel your body and allowing you to feel good. And that's going to look different for every person. So, in terms of chemicals, I always just like to remind people that all food is made up of chemicals. If you see like the chemical breakdown of a strawberry, like it's going to look kind of scary. So, just reminding people that just, what we see on a nutrition label doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. But I do think that and it's funny, I just posted a reel about this a couple days ago. It's okay if you want to eat more quote unquote whole foods. It's okay if you prefer not to have chemicals or, these dyes or whatever it is in your food. That's okay. The issue, I feel like, comes into where we feel guilt, stress, or anxiety if we have those things in our food, or if
I
we
see.
feel shameful or less than. Because I think that one thing that I always like to remind people is that it can be a privilege to be able to have access to some of those things. And for some people, they might only have
Absolutely.
access to the Fruit Loops, and that's still a super great source of nutrients for the body. And that's okay. So I think I always say there's a difference between a food rule and a food preference, to where I would prefer to eat whole foods. For the most part, I do eat pretty much, those whole foods, but there's not that guilt, shame, or anxiety if I'm, oh my gosh, we have nothing in the house. I just have to eat something processed, or we have to stop at McDonald's or something like that. And that's where having no food rules is truly individualized, and it's going to look different for every single person. Does that answer your question a little bit? Am I getting in the right
It does.
direction?
And I think what's different, it is. And here's where I think it gets complicated is just this idea, like for instance, there are so many things that we put in our food in the United States that are illegal in other countries, right? So to me, it's also like, how do we advocate for a better value system without judging that? Does that make sense? I'm like, I care about the things that our culture like has value on, and like how do we better take care of each other through the lens of nutrition? And so I never know how to navigate that, because I'm like, there are many things, like aspartame, for example, is illegal in many other countries. Like, and so I'm like, do we just like discredit that research that we know about that? Do we just say, oh, that research is ever evolving and changing? I just like, I don't know how to have advocacy for, hey, let's have different value systems here and not put these chemicals in the food, because then I feel like when I say that, that's judgmental.
Yes. So I would say, in terms of having things banned in other countries, it doesn't mean that they're unsafe. So there's so many different reasons. I mean, politics, different ways people read studies that can say, it's not allowed in one country, but it is in another. It doesn't mean it's, going to make you sick if you ingest it. I would highly recommend Food Science Babe. Her name is Erin. I don't know if you've
Ooh, I'm
ever
gonna write
talked
this
about
down.
her for that topic. She talks about that a lot. And it can explain more on that. But just kind of, again, being cautious. I know on social media we always see like, this is allowed in the US, but this isn't allowed in the other. There's so much, I mean, there that people aren't understanding totally, but we see this Instagram graphic and it's like, oh, that's convincing. And we automatically think,
Right.
oh my gosh, my ketchup is literally causing me to die. When that's not the case, we do have a lot of regulation as well. But that, again, doesn't mean that someone could say, you know what, I prefer not to eat that stuff. Totally fine. And the way that I kind of sometimes think about our food is made a lot of times to be hyper palatable. And I think that a lot of people think
Right.
that it is like to make us want to buy more. And a lot of times it probably is. That doesn't mean you can't understand and learn how to eat those foods in quote unquote moderation, or a way that it makes your body feel good. I was actually thinking about this the other day, and I feel like it's almost like saying you should make your books less good, so I don't want to stay up and read them all night. Or you should make your puppy uglier, so I don't want to just sit there and cuddle it. Um, not like that's not comparing like apples to apples, but you know what I mean? Like, I like to think like, yes, we want things to be pleasurable. Um, but I mean, there's so much nuance to that conversation. And
Yeah.
it's a big thing to try to change, right? The food system. But one thing what we can change, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't, legislate and, advocate for ourselves. But what can we do in the moment to help ourselves navigate that? How can we learn to enjoy those things that we can enjoy, but just like sometimes we decide, okay, my body needs sleep, I'm gonna shut the book, that's enough for tonight. We can learn to kind of like do the same thing with those hyper palatable foods.
Hey there, if you're enjoying the WeShape podcast and you've heard us talk about WeShape before, then you're probably thinking to yourself, hey, what is WeShape? Well, at WeShape, we create personalized at-home workouts for every single one of our members. These are workouts where every single movement is customized to you to help you connect with your body and care for your body in a much more meaningful way. We also have a community of people there to support you, to help uplift you as you examine your beliefs, set new intentions, and again, start showing up for yourself as an act of self-care rather than trying to do your workouts as an act of self-judgment. And hey, if you're a fan of the podcast, we also do a live podcast discussion group on Zoom, as well as other Q&As, as well as free challenges for all of our members to help you get motivated to actually start taking action to caring for yourself so you can feel better in your body and about your body. So if you want to try WeShape for free for 2 full weeks, go to WeShape.com/podcast and you can get started today. You touched on something huge there, which is we live in this society that gathers information in sound bites and headlines and clips that are often being distributed by people who are, armchair experts and just kind of generalists in a particular theme, who got their information from someone who's a little deeper, who got their information from someone who's a little bit deeper. So in my mind, it's a lot of times it's like playing telephone from the person who is an absolute specialist, who is doing the deepest research on this to, 20 tiers up. And then you get a headline that says, all carbs are bad and it'll kill you. And you're like, oh my God, but there's so many nuances to that conversation that aren't being reflected in that short form content. So,
and I hear you. And this is where I struggle because it does cause me stress and I don't want it to. So a perfect example of this is gluten in our home, right? Like Tyler and I used to run a different fitness company. We were down the rabbit hole of toxic weight loss culture, and we were not eating gluten. And so for 8 years, I didn't eat gluten. And the truth is I don't really have a reaction to it. So I was like, wait a minute, this is insane. So I eat gluten now. So this is not about me trying to advocate for that. But during that time, I did read a lot of literature around how they are producing wheat in our country and how like there was a lot of science to support this idea that maybe we should think more about this. And I'm not saying we should do something about it, but maybe we should be aware that this is how it goes, right? And you're very sensitive to that. I don't know if you even maybe you should be tested for celiac disease because you get really ill when you have it. But then when we went to Italy, you were pretty much fine. And so
pretty much fine.
I don't know.
I had
You said
a
you
blistering
felt
headache for
pretty
8
bad.
days, and then it went away, and I got to eat pasta and pizza for the rest of the time we were there.
I'm just saying that, what do we do when someone has spent time in the science and the research and then says, this is what we know about this particular food and how it's processed, and we know that some people react this way. How do I take that information and say, thank you for the information, and then just...
Some people react, but not all people react.
Is it just, you said something powerful earlier. You said, don't have rules, have preferences, right? And so, everybody needs to have their own autonomous journey in this where they say, oh, I'm listening to my body. This makes me feel good. This makes me feel bad. And I'm going to kick my heels up here, and I'm willing to go there with it. So, is that kind of the way you view it? Is just obviously giving everybody permission to have freedom of what they decide it is?
Yes. I think one super important thing I just want to point out with studies is that there was one that I was dissecting relatively recently about cheese being addictive. It releases certain opiate receptors in our brain and whatnot. But the thing with there's a couple things with studies. So we want to always look at the actual methods that are being done, because yes, what they had said in kind of the just conclusion of it if you were to read that, you'd be like, I'm never touching cheese again. But when you actually got into the methods of the research, they had to inject part of the cheese protein into rats' brains in order to elicit that effect. So not
my
only was
goodness.
it not in humans, it was in unrealistic doses, and it wasn't through our gut, it was directly into the brain. So there was a lot of flaws with that study.
Very different outcome.
I
I'm
inject
always
cheese
just-
into
I'm
my
not
brain
like-
in high doses all the time.
I'm not discrediting any studies. I'm always just saying be skeptical. Like, I spend so much time reading. It's not fun to do, but it's always kind of an important part to do. So I would just kind of like always be aware of that. And then, but just like you said, there's so much nuance. And one other thing I like to point out with research studies is the difference between correlation and causation. If someone is saying like
Yeah.
eating processed food makes you have a heart attack, right? Well, are you looking at all of the factors of that person? If they are heavily relying on processed food, do they also move their body? Do they also get enough sleep? How is their, mental health, their stress levels, all of those things? So it's like so much more dynamic. And I always also use weight loss where people say, oh, someone lost weight and their health improved. Okay, was it the actual weight loss that caused it, or were they also including more fruits and vegetables? Were they also moving their body? And weight loss was just kind of a byproduct of that happened, but what actually is causing the outcome is all of these other things. So that's just something I always caution people when we see like, oh, if people eat, fast food, then they get heart disease. It's like, okay, well, how often are they eating it? What is their other lifestyle factors like? If someone's relying on fast food, they're probably, maybe they are go, go, go. They don't have time to do self-care, sleep, move their body. There's so many different things to think about there.
Yeah,
Can I mention one thing about studies too? Just while we're talking about the caution of it, I think something that I always am aware of is like when we talk about an average, right? Let's pretend the average in the study is 0 to 100, and they're like, well, this happens average, it's 50. Well, if they have 1,000 people in the study, there's people at the 0, there's people at the 100, there's people at the 20, there's people at the 60, right? It's not like everyone is at the midline of this particular study. So I think that when we say average, it's such a huge misnomer because average means that there's someone all across the entire spectrum and you land at one of those points. But if we bring everybody together and we analyze the data, we say this is the actual average, which is just, frankly, it's kind of bullshit at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think what you're helping me a lot with this because I really have given up a lot of food rules and I've moved away from like the morality of food in a lot of ways, but I do get stuck sometimes in the like, well, I don't really want to have aspartame all day. Like I've done some reading on that and like so like you're giving me perspective on like it's a preference, not a rule. And then I can offer that, because I think what I'm thinking about too is like the educational piece. Like how do we get education on different nutrients without judgment so that we can make decisions that work for us? And then I think so that's kind of the other piece I'm thinking about is like I want to
Are you just trying to say how do I classify something that's bad as bad without making it bad?
maybe. But I want to understand, right? Like, I do want to understand the implications of my decisions, but I also feel like that in itself causes stress. And what I hear you saying and what I think about sometimes too is for us to be able to replicate thousands of factors in one person that contributes or affects their health is virtually impossible because not one person's the same. And so to draw any sort of causation is impossible. And like even to draw super strong correlations, like there's so many variables, right? And we had Chris Kresser on the podcast recently who does a lot of research on health and nutrition, but also brought such a wonderful perspective around like, do you have joy in your life? Do you listen to music? Do you go on hot hikes?
Do you pet your dog?
Do you pet your dog? Like so it's virtually like it is even the studies that have strong correlations to various nutritional choices and outcomes. It's really, really probably still hard to say, like, what else is going on, right? Like, does this person wake up and have a slow morning and meditate and enjoy their day? Or is this person under a ton of like, these are factors that are like, each person would have to like truthfully answer a 10,000 page questionnaire about all of the different factors. Oh, what happened in your childhood? Oh, are you in therapy? Like, there's too many factors is what I hear you saying.
Studies is a lot of these studies are done via questionnaires of people's reflection of themselves, which I don't think is all that accurate a lot of the time, especially when it's asking, what was it like 20 years ago and 10 years ago, right? So, I don't know.
But you're helping me because I do want to take, basically what I hear you saying is take the information that you read with a grain of salt. If you really care about it, do a little bit more digging and then maybe just let it go and categorize it as a preference and just move on from there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you nailed it. And I honestly think you just made a fabulous case for having no food rules, because we're all so different. And if we try to follow the set advice that someone else gives us, I even tell people, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to eat. I'm a registered dietitian, but I don't know how are these foods going to make your tummy feel? What makes you feel the most energized? What foods do you enjoy the most? Because that matters too. And I think that we just have to kind of assess what matters the most to us in terms of our beliefs, what makes us feel good. And it's almost kind of like picking and choosing your battles. Like, there's so many things that people can tell us to focus on, but it's like, but what matters to you? What it could also be like, what foods do you eat the most? Okay, maybe those ones are the ones that I'm going to do a little bit more digging into, or I'm going to be more mindful of. It's just so different. And that's why it's so important to learn to have that reflective process, which is what having no food rules is all about, to be able to understand, okay, these are the things where my energy makes the most sense for me to put. And these are the things where I don't really enjoy that much, or I don't have it that often. So I'm really not going to worry too much about that. It's really kind of deciding, like you said, what kind of matters the most. And then it's really, I think, gaining confidence in ourselves that I can make a decision. I can decide that this is my preference without having to look to someone else to kind of like validate that. And that's hard. But the more that you start to tune into your body, you kind of like gain that confidence.
I have a question for you. We've been
Yeah.
kind of on an intuitive eating journey for the last bit here, and that's something you talk about with no food rules. And for me, my experience of that was like I walked into the grocery store and I bought things like that I was not allowed to have. Like it was almost like an unsupervised kid in a candy store. Like I was like, I'm going to go down the aisle in the middle and I'm going to buy the peanut butter that has the sugar in it, and I'm going to all the stuff I had told myself. Again, these rules I've subscribed to over years and years and years of people giving me information and being the authority, where I wasn't like leaning into my own self. And I bought all the stuff and I ate all the things and I had like the greatest time. And then I kind of, over time, I've been fortunate enough to kind of reach a more balanced place by being like, wow, yes, it was so cool to like let that pendulum swing all the way to the left and like have donuts for breakfast or whatever it is for you. And then there was a place where I was like, I don't really want the like super treaty food right now. Like I really do actually crave, and like I hate saying this because it sounds like so fake, but like I really crave a salad. I really want something that's green. I really want whatever. And that's like been my experience. But do you think that happens for everybody? And if you do, like, is it just part of the process? Is there a way to get a little bit closer to, hey, I'm going to let go of these food rules, but I'm not going to like, I don't want to use the term fall off the wagon, but like, go super hard in the treat. Like I'm just going to eat whatever sounds good, whatever's palatable, etc. Because nutrition's a part of this. You're a registered dietitian. Like there are nutrients in food. They do different things for our body. How does that kind of all happen for you?
Yes. So I did the same thing. I was very restrictive, and then I swung to the other end of the pendulum. I was like, we're done with this. And I think that is a very normalized, and that is one way you can do it. For me, it put me in a cycle of then just binge eating. And honestly, I felt worse with that. And I didn't know how to find this balance again. I was like, I don't want to go back to restriction. I feel like now I'm just eating all the things. Like, it's a lose-lose situation to me right now because I couldn't figure out how to find that balance. And so what I did, and this is now what I teach, is a much more structured approach to it, because just jumping right into the deep end, it is typically too overwhelming for most people. Yes, that is one way to approach it, but it's not the only way to go about it. So the way that I teach, I talk first about undoing a lot of the damage that dieting has caused to our metabolism, to our hunger cues, and focusing on that first before we go stock our pantries, before we do all of this stuff. Because for me, I talk about what I call the chocolate cake incident. I sat down, I was like, I'm going to have a slice of this chocolate cake. It's going to be great. There are no food rules. And I ate the whole cake. And in the moment, I was like, okay, this is just part of the process. This is like fine. I'll do better next time. And it just kept happening. And what I realized was that if I have no sense of my hunger and fullness cues, how do I expect myself to stop eating the cake when I'm satisfied? So I teach first starting with that, and then it prevents going to such an extreme on the pendulum. The structured approach, some people don't like that. Some people are like, I don't want to do it. I just want to, eat all the things, and that is valid. And I think that just shows there's so much more nuance with how to go about this. And I would also really encourage anyone who may have said, like, I've tried to just go stock my pantry and I just ate all the stuff and that felt worse than being on a diet. Don't give up. There's nuance to this. Everyone is so different. Maybe you try more baby steps and seeing if that works. Because I almost gave up. At that, I was like, you know what? I would rather just go back to having my food rules. But sometimes just trying something in a new way can be helpful. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Okay.
You touched on something big there that I was going to kind of ask anyways, which was, I feel like in my own journey, struggling with my own food rules and I guess I say I have an addictive personality, right? When we give ourselves the freedom to do things, yeah. When we give ourselves the freedom to do things like have no food rules, and then we go after eating foods and things like that, it's really difficult to toe the line between this is my intuition and this is my attempt at stuffing down some feelings and using food as a tool to provide that. And I'm hearing you say that what you're trying to do is teach people the sensations of the body so that they have a deeper sense of like, where is this coming from and how does this make me feel and stuff like that, which is great. But how do you help people really build that awareness between the difference between those two things?
Between emotion and like actually wanting the food?
Yeah. Like, so if I just crave cake and if I just lean into my cravings, am I leaning into my cravings because I'm trying to facilitate what my body needs? Or am I leaning into my cravings because I'm trying to escape some pain and I'm using that as a tool?
Yes. So I think the biggest thing that you can do is just be present in that moment and ask yourself, what is this food doing for me? And asking yourself, like, first of all, am I tasting this food? Half the time when we're using food as a coping mechanism and to kind of escape, when you ask yourself, like, do I enjoy this? Does this taste good? And you actually taste the food, it's like, I mean, if it's ice cream, it probably tastes good, but does it taste as amazing as you're making it out to be in your head? So I think that's like the first thing to tune into. But then kind of again, just asking yourself, what am I expecting this food to do? Am I expecting this food to be a source of enjoyment? Okay, is it doing that? If I'm not present, it's probably not bringing me actually that much joy. So what is bringing me the joy? Is it tuning out? Is it just like not having to think about my problems for a little bit? Is there a
Just the
way that I
activity.
could do that and have a more comfortable outcome? Because I always say, when it comes to trying to escape things, food, it can be a pick me up. Absolutely. But when we eat the whole pan of brownies and then we have a stomach ache, we're kind of left with two crummy situations. We've still got our emotions that we haven't actually handled, and now we've got a tummy ache. So it's kind of like just asking yourself, in the end, is this a beneficial scenario? Sometimes eating the cookie for, a pick me up, totally beneficial. Eating the whole pan, maybe the outcome not so much. So I think it's just kind of like awareness of the why and then the actual eating process.
I love that.
That was
answer.
super helpful.
That
was
was incredibly helpful.
We're all like, great. Thank you for that homework. We'll be taking that home and working on that in our spare time.
Well, I'll be talking to our chocolate cakes at night. Why am I eating you right now?
Tell me.
That's so, yeah. I mean, it's true though, because I think that just pause. I mean, that can be true with anything, really.
Anything.
Yeah.
Pause and what's
Yeah.
your intention?
Why?
underneath
Why?
this?
Why
Yeah.
am I doing this?
I know. I love to just eat when I'm like bored. It's a fun activity. It gives you
I
something to do.
procra-
It's
I-
kind
And
of
maybe
like-
that's okay sometimes. Yeah.
To eat. And I know that about myself. So
Procrastinate.
I'm aware of it. Sometimes I'm like, I don't really feel like getting back to work. I've had breakfast. Am I hungry? Okay, I could have a little bit more peanut butter. And I think that is just like, that also shows you it's not that we're never going to have these issues. Like, we just learn, okay, I know that about myself. Now I know how to navigate it. I know that, do you actually want the peanut butter, Colleen, or are you just trying not to get back to work? And the more that you practice it, you're able to do that without judgment. and just be like, oh, I see you. Okay.
I love that.
Going just one layer deeper, like how do you help people deal with the shame around admitting that they've built the awareness that they're doing this to escape their pain?
Yes. I think that it's such an internalized thing. And I think I talk about brain rewiring. I mean, there's so much, I think just like our neuroscience is just fascinating on how we can literally create new neural pathways in our brain of the way that we think. And sometimes it's just understanding that, like, just because you have a thought doesn't mean that that is true. It's almost like our thoughts are, someone recently used this analogy that our thoughts are like people on a bus with you. You get to decide if you engage with those people, if you get up and move seats, if you just get off the bus altogether. They're not always, and they also don't always stem from you. So asking yourself, like, oh, I feel guilty that I'm doing this. Do I need to feel guilty? Or is that something that I have been taught that, eating when you're not hungry, you should feel shameful for that. You should feel bad for that. And I always say shame is not a good way to create change, right? It just makes us want to like turn into kids and just like have a little hissy fit and just kind of like rebel. So what if you just said, you know what,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
okay that this is happening, but I'm a human being. This happens to a lot of people, and I can decide what I do now. What is going to serve me the most in this moment, and trying to approach it in a different way with some compassion and just see how it feels. Maybe just do that as an experiment one time and see, okay, I'm going to take what Colleen said and I'm going to talk to myself like a friend. I'm going to be kind to myself. Do I have a more beneficial outcome? Does that feel better? Just give it a try and see what happens. You might like it.
That's beautiful. I love what you said about the mind too, because the heart beats. That's what it does. The mind thinks. That's what it does. And we don't have to believe everything that we think. And that's such an important thing for people to recognize. When we feel something, what's the belief behind that? What is it serving us? How, is there a better belief that would serve us more effectively? And I think that that's a challenging process, but you spoke to neuroscience and the ability to just do things repetitiously over and over again until a new pattern forms. And I think that's just a miracle of being human. It just takes a lot of patience and persistence.
And I want to say that I think that there's this idea as well. I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but I want to say this, that when our brain does these tricks, we're on the bus, we got stuck next to the thought we don't want to be next to, I think we often think that we have to figure it out ourselves. And I don't think that we necessarily do. I think that this is the time, and this is why we have community at WeShape, right? Is that it's okay to say, my thoughts are taking over, I'm feeling too much shame, I'm in an emotional eating pattern I can't get out of, I'm unhappy, I need to reach outside of myself. I don't need to figure it all out by myself. And I just think that, like, having you as a resource, there's many people on social media that are doing amazing things. There's so many things that we can reach for. And so I just want to give people that permission, because I know for a long time there was a lot of suffering that I was going through that I was like, oh, you'll just have to figure this out and go read another book. And it's like, no, but like sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know the answer and I want help from somebody else. And so it just brings me back to like really wanting to extend gratitude for the work that you're doing, because it's okay if we get stuck in these patterns, and it's okay to reach outside of our own mind to try to seek support to help with some of those things. So,
and the truth is, there's a lot of people out there who have stumbled and fallen and just hit every single wall along the way and can say, hey, let me show you all the failures that I had or all the mistakes that I made so you don't make them, and then you can have a little bit more of a smooth and effective journey. I think
Or
it's
know
one
that
of the
when
best
you
ways to learn.
do make those mistakes, that it's maybe part of the process.
Yeah, or it's
and
part of the
that you're
process.
still going in the right direction, and that
Yeah.
it's okay to like stumble and fall and try again. I love what you said about trying again, because sometimes when I think about intuitive eating, we're like, is this the next new diet? Is this the next new thing that's going to fix us or whatever? And it's like, how do we tap in? How do we trust? How do we try again? How do we just keep going forward?
Showing up.
yeah, because I think when we're talking about shame and those thoughts, it's like those are the things that want to keep the silence inside. Those are the things that don't allow that humility to come out and say, like, I need to understand a better way. So it's just like, I just want to constantly offer people permission that there is a huge community of people, they're available, and we can all support each other in breaking some of these belief systems in trying something new and offering no judgment, and we're just all doing the best that we can, right? So I just want to thank you so much, Colleen, for your time, for the work that you're doing, and I'd love for you to share where people can find you if they're feeling stuck themselves and they want to have someone like you who's a professional who can offer them more support. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I'm most active there at no.food.rules. You can also find me on TikTok. I'm on YouTube as Colleen Christensen. Um, you can find me on my blog. I do think that when we were talking about like what's a food rule and what's a food preference, usually in my Instagram bio, I have a link to a quiz that you can take. So if there's a, we've been talking about this, if we're like, I think I have a food rule, I'm not sure if this is a food preference, it could be a really great resource. Just kind of spurred in my mind.
Definitely, if you guys are listening, check that out. And again, we're so grateful for the work you're doing, Colleen. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to talk with you again.
Thanks,
Yes,
Colleen.
thank you so much. It was fabulous. I could talk to you guys all day.